Welcome to Gen Z Up to the Ballot, the second edition in the series where we take a deeper dive into Gen Z's part in the upcoming election, locally in Athens, Ohio, and beyond. I'm your host, Reese Thompson. With the election exactly a week from today, nearly 41 million eligible voters a part of Gen Z, ages 18 to 27 in 2024, could possibly tip the scales in a close election. In the crucial days before November 5th, I have two guests joining me to break down perspective for Gen Z members on both sides of the ballot. Ohio University College Republicans Political Director Aiden Fox, thank you, and Ohio University Political Science Majors Association President affiliating with the Democratic Party, Aishni Tandon. Thank you guys so much for coming on today.
Pleasure to be here.
Of course.
So obviously both of you have an interest in politics. Gen Z has not seemed to show too much interest in politics until this election and maybe the previous election, I'd say. Now they make up a critical 20% of the overall voter population. So Aisha, let's start with you. What made you become interested enough to join a political organization?
I would say politics, growing up as a minority was probably a little not optional to be a part of my life. You inevitably feel the effects of what's going on politically. And I remember in the 2016 election, we were pretty young, 13, I think. And there was a lot of negative rhetoric around, maybe people who looked like me. I think that really pushed me into activism, and that's probably when I started getting super involved in political things.
Yeah, and Aiden, for you?
Yeah, I think for me it was around the same time, the 2016 election. Because obviously, as was already said, we were all pretty young. We didn't have a complete understanding of the things going on. But I remember that's when I started to form my own sort of political opinions. For example, my entire family almost is pretty left-wing. My mom has voted Democrat for, probably at least the last 30 years. And before I had actually looked into the election myself, she would be saying, oh, I heard so-and-so about Clinton, she's doing great, Trump's, this, and this, and this. And one day I was on YouTube, and one of Clinton's, rallies was live. I started watching it, I was like, okay, I could find myself agreeing here and there. And then because I was watching a Clinton rally, an old recording of a Trump one came up. And then I watched that expecting myself to, despise this man because of what my parents had been saying. But I found myself oddly agreeing with some of the things he was going on. So that's probably when I first got started into, just politics in general. And it's just snowballed from there.
So it seems like for both of you, your interest sparked during the 2016 election cycle. So that presidency of Donald Trump was one of three that most of Gen Z has lived through, which is the presidencies of Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden that they generally remember. And we were obviously born for most of Gen Z, after the 9/11 attacks. So how do you think Gen Z's perception of presidency, growing up observing the former presidency's policies, for example, character, and just the overall political culture that we've witnessed through our own eyes, shape your political view differently? And maybe that even means from older generations. Aiden, do you want to start?
Yeah, I know for me, the dichotomy between the vice presidential debate and the presidential debate that we've had, between Trump and Harris, and then Walz and Vance, I think most of Gen Z would probably prefer to watch things like the vice presidential debate, things that were civil, you could actually hear policy and talking points, rather than each campaign just trying to get their soundbite for the next campaign ad. But I think, unfortunately, Gen Z's kind of grown up with that, just very eye-catching, very crude, almost sort of, politicianing. Because, as we both said, the first time we actually started paying attention to politics and elections was in the 2016 election cycle. I remember parts of the Obama presidency, but I couldn't tell you, how he was on stage without going back and looking, at the debates, so on and so forth. I think some of us definitely want a more cordial era of politics again.
Yeah, Aishni, for you?
I would completely agree. I feel like back when we were that young, it was kind of the perfect storm of, all this unregulated social media, and parents don't know what's going on, and eye-catching campaigns and these crazy candidates. And whether it's Trump or Biden, we've definitely lost professionalism in the role of president. I think it's a lot less prioritized over sensationalizing your campaign points and catching people's attention that way. So I completely agree. I think a lot of us had that eye-opening moment when we saw the vice presidential debate and we were like, oh, this is how things could be.
Absolutely. And within your organizations that you work with, you are working with people also a part of Gen Z. Is that how they are getting their news too and persuading their own political views, would you say?
This might be a little different from you because it's a nonpartisan organization. So we actually do find some difficulty. We all love each other, but get along well. But we do find some difficulty discerning misinformation, not when you have such polarized parties. You know, it could create false ideas of other people that are in those parties, and that is something that you have to mitigate. I think we're losing willingness to communicate as well. So in running an organization, definitely taken steps to make sure that people take time to understand where others are coming from.
Yeah. I'd say the current landscape definitely affects people, like how people get their news about candidates, so on and so forth. Part of my job as political director is that, every week's meeting, I give at least some, summation of the news that happened during the week, especially for American politics. And I try to make it as balanced and fair as possible. Obviously, I try to make sure it's, for things that we care about, the election cycle, things that Republicans are running on, so on and so forth. But with the new way that candidates are behaving, I'm actually seeing a lot of people enjoying, not just even for like an entertainment value, but enjoying the way some politicians are talking now. A lot of people in the club really liked when Trump went on the Joe Rogan Experience recently. They liked when J.D. Vance went on the Theo Von's podcast. And even I can sort of enjoy like when Walls and AOC were, just playing Madden on a live stream. I enjoy seeing these politicians as people rather than politicians. I enjoy seeing them talk the way I would talk rather than, carefully choosing their words 24/7. I want to know who I'm actually voting for. I don't want to see a staged personality. I want to know who this person actually is.
And that aligns a lot with Gen Z's values in general, which is known that our generation wants authenticity and realistic ideas. Even in news, when people are talking to you, they want somebody who feels like they can talk to you rather than speaking at you. So I want to ask, what is the culture like within your political organizations when you are talking about these issues? Is it on a more surface level, or is it talking about different ideas within each other's?
I would say that for us, it might be a little different than it normally is in a college atmosphere, but we very intentionally created an environment where we can talk about politics. They have like a list of rules that says, criticize politicians, not their supporters, criticize policy points, not, people's feelings, things like that. So I think if you really do take those steps and you are intentional with how you're communicating, if you're in a political organization, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to communicate across both parties and do it well. But that can be a little harder, especially with college students who aren't used to communicating about politics all the time. So I would say in the org, it's definitely not as much of a struggle as it is outside of it.
And for you?
The OUCRs are strictly a partisan organization. So, of course, it does look a little bit different. Everyone there is at least some shade of conservative. It depends, person to person. I enjoy arguing, policy. I enjoy, talking about what candidates should be doing, what direction should the nation be going. And we have plenty of people who are very passionate about that same type argument. We have some people who may not be super knowledgeable but are willing to learn, so on and so forth. Like I said, it's a different environment when everyone at least has some shade of agreement.
Absolutely. And what do you think that Gen Z has learned that they want in a president moving forward in the future after this election cycle?
It's difficult to judge because both candidates are so different. And I'd say even Gen Z itself is incredibly different. I can't peg down where our generation is leaning. Like when you're on a college campus, obviously you see, very left-leaning, sorts of causes. People are very vocal about their beliefs. Not so much when you're a conservative on campus, for, plenty of reasons, some valid, some not so much. We were at the involvement fair earlier this year. I was tabling, for our club, obviously. And we had plenty of people come up to us and, sort of like whisper in our ear, like, hey, I'm probably voting you guys, but I can't be seen with you. That sort of thing. I've seen some charts, showing evidence that maybe, Gen Z men are leaning more right wing. Obviously, plenty of Gen Z women are moving towards the left. So I have no clue, to put it short.
Yeah.
I think if there were to be one thing that I think Gen Z wants really badly as a whole, it's to have a candidate who says what they mean and to have follow through. We are so used to promises and not having them fulfilled, and I think you're right. Like, I don't know if you could really place one direction that Gen Z is moving, but authenticity, like we were talking about, is something people value and people really want to see action.
So we both say that, or you both say that you can't pinpoint exactly where Gen Z is going. Do you think that's because Gen Z is ready for a new face to take office than to candidates who have already taken office in previous years?
I'm not sure. I know plenty of Gen Z conservatives are, aching for like a new figurehead. Thing is, right now, I'd say most of them are probably at least satisfied with Trump. Maybe they could do with, what they would perceive as, character issues, get rid of those in the next candidate. However, generally what I'm hearing from the people in our club is that whoever the next candidate is, they essentially just want Trump, but younger. They like his energy. They like what they believe to be his authenticity. They like the fact that he's not established in D.C., or at least wasn't before he ran. When it comes to the rest of Gen Z, probably sort of the same thing. I think a lot of people did enjoy Joe Biden, but he had some pretty glaring issues when he was in office. Cognitive decline. People had issues with his stances on Israel and Palestine. So it's probably new faces, but same policies that we've seen in recent years.
And I want to follow up on that. Why do you think some Gen Z voters focus on character over policy?
I feel like a lot of voters nowadays have gotten this attitude where if they vote for a person, they have to endorse every single thing that that person does. My attitude is whenever I vote for a candidate, regardless of whether it's for the Senate, presidency, a state rep position, I'm voting for them because I mostly agree with them. I know at some point, inevitably, they're going to do something that I don't like. They're going to vote for something that I did not want them to vote for. But at the same time, I can't control that. And just because I voted for that person doesn't mean I have to endorse everything they do.
Yeah, Aishni, what do you think about this?
I think that Gen Z, a lot of us maybe care about character because it does affect how the world operates, the character of the president. I think the president of the United States is not only the only position in the country, but maybe in the world where you should always be very cognizant of what you're saying. Because every single thing you say is going to have an impact. And I think a lot of us felt the changes in treatment when, presidents with their different rhetoric came. As far as being unsatisfied with both of the candidates, I felt like during Biden's term, people were aching for a different representative. I felt like so many Democrats I heard say, I'd vote Republican. I like a lot of these policies so much more if it wasn't Trump. You hear that a lot. So I did feel like very, very badly Gen Z is looking for a fresh start.
If you're tuning in right now, this is the Gen Z Up to the Ballot podcast. I'm here joined with Ohio University College Republicans Political Director Aiden Fox and Ohio University Political Science Majors Association President affiliating with the Democratic Party, Aishni Tandon, and we are talking about Gen Z and their role in the upcoming election. So Statista shared a study that showed a rising number of members of Gen Z are identifying as independent, over 30%. This is also one of the biggest changes in political party stances compared to previous years. Have you noticed this trend personally, and why do you think those percentages are climbing for Gen Zers?
I have noticed this trend personally. I think it's a great trend. I think the bipartisan system we're in has its merits, but a lot of people recognize that it kind of closes us into these boxes where we have to go with one or another, which in a Democratic election might, obviously if you only have two options, you really might not end up with the best choice. So I've seen this rising dissatisfaction and in being a Democrat or a Republican, more people wanting it just to be about policy, not about party. And I support this. I think a lot of it has to do with the rapid flow of information that we have access to now, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I'd say sort of along the same lines. I'm definitely happy to hear that more people are, trying to figure out their ideas for themselves, not necessarily throw themselves into a box when they're 18 and then stick that way for the rest of their life. I think it kind of flows along with what I was saying earlier about when people identify as something or vote for someone, they feel like they have to endorse or follow everything that candidate or party does. I'm a pretty moderate person myself, and I find myself disagreeing with the Republican Party all the time, but I still agree with them more often than not. So I vote and identify as Republican. But a couple of years ago, before I got into college, I would probably have identified as, some form of libertarian or another, and identifying as, third party, essentially. And plenty of our people in the club are, the same way. A couple of years ago, they would have identified as libertarian, and as they got older, their views solidified, so on and so forth. So I'm not sure if this trend is going to continue, but it is trending in the right way, because I would like to see more competition, in the two-party system.
So do you think that the two political party system is working, or is it just being taken out of proportion or possibly abused?
I think it's being taken out of proportion and abused. We see, for example, Obama, didn't codify abortion into law. And that was so he had something to run on. And you see both parties doing that a lot. And I think as long as we have a two-party system, there is no incentive to have follow-through and growth. There's just incentive to keep two crowds fighting as much as they can so one person can win.
Do you think that's more of a cultural issue, or because the two political party system has historically been working, obviously, in previous years. What's the changing point now?
I think that it is the rapid flow of communication. I think it's the fact that we understand so much of what is going on around us. And that we do just know so much of what's working and what's not. It has become a culture war. I'll say that. Two sides going against each other. It's become a culture war, and it really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be to love America, you have to be a Republican. To be brat, you have to be a Democrat. I mean, it doesn't need to be that way. And I think the two-party system has really capitalized on people's insecurities that way.
Yeah, the two-party system is definitely very hostile towards anyone outside trying to get in. We can even see this in local elections here. In John Rose trying to contend for the commissioner spot against Commissioner Atkins. It was pretty difficult for him to get on the ballot, with his petition. And even then, some people who signed the petition were contacted about their signatures from someone trying to, delegitimize his own petition. So we can see this on the, local county level all the way up to the national level, the way, like Robert Kennedy, for example, was kicked out of the Democratic primary and then he ran as an independent, threatening votes from both Trump and Biden. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely not a friendly system if you're not already inside of it.
As I mentioned earlier, Gen Z was born after historical events such as 9/11 or being very young at the time. But what we were born for is the rise of social media, which has been brought up a lot, and having that fast-paced environment of always knowing what's constantly going on, greatly impacting how Gen Z is receiving information about the election. We know algorithms can be dangerous when trying to receive accurate news about each of these candidates sometimes. So how has social media impacted your own political views and basing your information off of discussion points within your organizations?
Oh gosh, I'd be lying if I would say that social media hasn't greatly impacted my political views. I mean, it definitely was the reason I was able to be mobilized at such a young age and carry that passion through. The misinformation, though, is a huge, real problem, and I think it's gotten to the point where maybe the harms are outweighing the costs for the people. I read a statistic like maybe 70% of information on TikTok is wrong. It's really crazy. I'll see, especially on TikTok, information about both sides that's just wrong. You could easily even just Google it and see that it's not true in 2 seconds. And those are really sensationalized. You send them to all these people and everyone sees them, they get so mad and like, can you believe they're doing this? And people carry that. People get hurt. People are like, I can't believe that this politician is doing this. This is so horrible. And they carry that throughout their lives, and they tell their family and their friends. And I think there needs to start being a hard crackdown on misinformation.
Yeah, I'd say most of the same things. Social media has provided, near limitless information, but people do not have a limitless capacity to filter said information. For both sides, social media is extremely dangerous in creating an echo chamber for radicalization. All the time I'll have to look at a news article and wonder, can I actually trust this information that I just read? And it can even be from reputable news sources now. I'll have to go and research, what they were talking about. A lot of information about, like, issue 1, for example, I didn't know, because both Republicans and Democrats were advertising, a vote this way will end gerrymandering. Like, yes to ban gerrymandering, no to ban gerrymandering. It's not until that I actually read the bill, figured out what it's going to do, did I form opinion for myself. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the time of the day to read a 17-page amendment, even for their state legislation. So you'll hear candidates make all these, bold claims, like, for example, the, quote-unquote bipartisan border bill that both Trump and Kamala Harris have been, feuding over. Until you actually look at what the bill allocates money for, you can't make an educated opinion on it. And I think politicians on both sides are taking advantage of this fact. So it's almost like whoever gets their story out first is going to win.
Yes. And a polling director from Harvard predicts a robust amount of Gen Zers at the polls, but says they have not peaked at the same levels as 2020 yet. So a lot of Gen Z has registered to vote. Do you think that is going to happen and they will legit show up to the polls on Election Day this year?
Oh, yeah. When you look at numbers of early ballots that have been cast, of course, at this point, you can only see, party affiliation. But the number of, mail-in votes that have been cast have already surpassed 2020 numbers. And that's even, now that we're outside of the pandemic. Early voting has seen record turnout. I don't think we'll really know the statistics until after the election, obviously. But if there's anything that I've seen more of in this election, it's definitely enthusiasm from both sides.
What have you seen?
I'd agree. I think, and I think as time goes on, younger people will continue to only vote more and more. It's definitely not the same as it used to be, where those crazy kids don't care at all. But the only thing I think that could impact that is the Israel-Palestine situation. I think a lot of people in Gen Z particularly are stuck on not wanting to vote for either candidate because of that situation. And that just general air of I don't know what to do, I think is maybe the only thing that could impact it. But if I were to guess, I would say it would be even higher than 2020.
Why do you think Gen Z is so passionate about the Israel-Palestine situation?
Well, first of all, you're seeing it all on camera. You're seeing dead bodies. You're seeing really graphic things that you're not used to seeing. And that is obviously going to impact someone. I think that Gen Z has naturally an inclination towards compassion and empathy, maybe more than other generations have. So I think the loss of human life at such a scale, seeing it so actively happening, being able to literally go on your phone and communicate with someone who's dying within seconds. You can do that. You can go talk to someone in Palestine really easily. I think that is one of the biggest factors.
Do you think Gen Z should be as focused on some of the situations or policies that they do? They like to care a lot about climate change and abortion, some of the other ones. Do you think those are policies that they should care? They care about the economy as well. Are these legit policies you think Gen Z should focus on?
I think so, and people can have their own reasons for doing so. People in our club specifically, they're angry more so at the U.S. for dragging things out. They see issues that we've had here at home, for example, issues with FEMA getting funding for hurricanes Helene. They'll see economic, disparity in the U.S., all sorts of issues, the opioid epidemic, homelessness, veterans issues. They'll see, headlines every other week of, such and such $1 billion amount given to, a foreign nation, and then get angry about, why aren't we using that money here? So I do think that it's an unhelpful split between people who are really wanting to try and focus on home first and then think about the international stage. Me personally, I think we definitely have to strike a balance between that. I think people need to understand that the United States does have a place in the world stage, and if we don't take that place, someone that does not like us will take that space.
Aishni, do you think we need to strike a balance between home state and international?
Yeah, I also agree that I think we do a little too much overseas that could be allocated back home. But I don't think we should necessarily, America also gives the most money out of any country to humanitarian causes. So I don't think maybe necessarily all of that is bad. Most of it's bad. So I do agree that there should be more of a balance.
And lastly, as we near election day, according to the New York Times polling averages, the race remains slimmer and slimmer between the two candidates. Overall, Kamala Harris is leading by less than 1%. This has been her smallest lead since she became the presumptive Democratic nominee. Trump has kind of just plateaued and stayed the same and slightly increased throughout the past few months. This is the time where undecided voters are making their last-minute decisions. Maybe people are switching their votes. I want to ask each of you, why do you think that is? And is Gen Z on the fence still with Election Day coming up so soon?
I do think Gen Z is on the fence. And I think that a lot of people maybe are coming down to near Election Day and then actually looking into policies for themselves and seeing a different view on things. I do think it'll continue to be a tight race. I think we're a pretty split generation. But I do feel like people are taking a little more time to educate themselves as we get closer to the election. And the talk is a little more policy now.
Yeah. No matter what, this election is going to come down to a couple thousand votes in a couple different states. Trump's had a 1% to less than 1% in every swing state so far. And, hopefully for our folks that holds. But I think Gen Z is very opinionated. And I think at this point in the election, most of us know where we stand. I think most of the undecided voters are probably going to be older, like millennial, not quite close to baby boomer age, but that's where I see most undecided standing, in my opinion.
And that's all the information we have for you today. Aishni and Aiden, thank you so much for coming and talking with me today and sharing your insight. We have a special Gen Z Up to the Ballot live coverage on Election Day in the headquarters of Schoonover Center to find out how Gen Z will play out in this election. But listeners, remember that while we provide facts and opinions, at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide. Thank you for listening and have a great night.